Se eu repetir alguma coisa, vocês me desculpem, porque eu não vi.
Well, if I repeat something, please forgive me because I didn't hear the speech of Comrade Mao Vieira. But certainly, if he spoke about what we heard together, I already know what he said. I am returning to Brazil after a week of travel with possibly the most important delegation a Brazilian president has ever traveled with. I was very happy when the President of the Senate, David Colom, accepted my invitation to come to Japan and Vietnam. I was also very happy when others accepted traveling with me on this trip because it's not just a business trip. It's necessary to show the world that Brazil has civilized political behavior. When the President of the Republic and the legislative power travel together, we provide greater density and clarity in strengthening our democracy. I traveled with 11 ministers and 5 union leaders because we also had meetings with union movements, in addition to other people who came separately, especially business people who went to Japan and Vietnam. I can tell the press that I have traveled extensively as President of the Republic, both from 2003 to 2010 and now. I have traveled because Brazil is an extremely important country, much more important than the treatment it often receives from some political analysts or companions who make hasty judgments about a significant country. I make a point of saying everywhere I go that Brazil is neither better nor worse than anyone else. We simply want to be respected for who we are, with our culture and our identity. And I insist on showcasing this new Brazil. A Brazil without hatred, a non-denialist Brazil, a country that respects its partners worldwide. We are demonstrating that there is nothing better for a country like Brazil than betting on multilateralism. We are in favor of free trade. We don't want protectionism or Cold Wars. We want to sell the good things our country produces anywhere in the world. That's why we will continue traveling around the world, traveling with business people, deputies and ministers, because we have much to offer. This year is particularly significant as we host key events like the BRICS meeting and COP30 in Belém, Pará. Hosting COP30 in Belém, in the heart of the Amazon, calls attention to the importance of preserving this region and demands global responsibility. In 2009 at COP15 in Copenhagen, rich countries promised $100 billion annually for forest conservation, but have yet to deliver on this promise. 16 years later, they owe approximately $1.6 trillion for this commitment. At COP30 in Belém, we aim to highlight the significance of financing preservation efforts, not just in Brazil but also in other South American countries, Congo, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Under every tree canopy in these forests are people, rubber tappers, indigenous people, small rural workers, fishermen, women, who deserve dignity and access to material goods like everyone else. If we want these poor communities to preserve nature, we must finance their living conditions. Brazil has committed to achieving zero deforestation by 2030 and advancing energy transition through clean energy production. Although Petrobras is significant for us, we are investing in energy transition because clean energy production reduces reliance on fossil fuels. During this trip, we discussed opening markets with Japan and Vietnam, for both exports and imports, to increase trade flows significantly. It's unacceptable that Brazil only has a trade flow of $7.7 billion with Vietnam or $11 billion with Japan when it reached $17 billion in 2011. Brazil must showcase its qualities, commercially, scientifically, technologically, and its agricultural and industrial production globally. This visit was productive. We held meetings with Vietnam's president, General Secretary of the Communist Party, the highest authority, National Assembly President, and Economy Minister. Vietnam exemplifies resilience. It has faced multiple global powers, including England, China, France, Russia, and the US, and emerged victorious each time due to its people's bravery and determination. Lastly, Brazil will continue advocating for reforms within international institutions like the United Nations Security Council and financial organizations such as the IMF and World Bank. The current structures no longer reflect global realities. They must evolve. For a country like Brazil, there is nothing better than betting on multilateralism. We are in favor of free trade. We do not want protectionism. We want multilateralism. We no longer want a Cold War. And we want to sell the good things our country produces to any country in the world. That is why we will continue traveling the world. That is why we will continue traveling with business people, deputies, and ministers, because we have much to offer. Especially this year, we have the BRICS meeting, and as we did at the G20, I have no doubt that we will hold the best BRICS meeting ever since its inception. We will also host COP30, and I want to tell you that COP30 will be held in Para, in the city of Belém. With all the challenges that exist in the state and in Brazil, I always tell people not to look at our COP as if it were being held in Paris, New York, or London. Look at it as if it were being held in Belém, in Para, with all the challenges we face. I want to tell you that hosting COP30 in the heart of the Amazon is a call for global awareness about its significance. Everyone has an opinion about the Amazon, everyone talks about it, but few people truly know it. We want to show it as it is so people understand that maintaining the forest standing, not only in Brazil but also in other South American countries, Congo, Vietnam, and Indonesia, requires financing from rich countries that have long exploited and degraded the world. These countries emitted greenhouse gases 200 years ago, and therefore have a historical debt to humanity. We want to host COP30 there so they understand that beneath every tree canopy there is a rubber tapper, an indigenous person, a small rural worker, a fisherman or woman. People who want to live with dignity and respect and have access to material goods like everyone else. If we want these poor communities to preserve nature, we must finance their living conditions. I participated in COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009, when rich countries promised $100 billion annually for forest conservation. They have not delivered until today, 16 years later, and now owe approximately $1.6 trillion. We will host another COP now and insisted it be held in the Amazon so people comprehend its importance and understand the need for financing. This year is extremely important for Brazil because we are inviting many countries to participate. I have already sent letters inviting them to both BRICS and COP30. I want key global leaders to attend because many rich countries are not taking climate issues seriously. The Kyoto Protocol was never fulfilled, and many deny even the Paris Agreement, including a former U.S. president who dismissed it altogether. If major nations responsible for much of the planet's pollution do not take climate issues seriously, who will? In Brazil's case, we will take it seriously. That is why we are not waiting for anyone to commit. We have pledged zero deforestation by 2030 on our own initiative. We are also committed to energy transition because we believe that increasing clean energy production reduces reliance on fossil fuels. This trip was about discussing these issues with other countries, including Japan, and opening markets for our products both for export and import. It is unacceptable that a country as large as Brazil has only $7.7 billion in trade with Vietnam or $11 billion with Japan, when trade with Japan reached $17 billion back in 2011. My view is that Brazil must take responsibility for promoting its own products globally. Brazil does not have an arrogant government that expects the world to come to us. We must travel abroad and showcase our qualities, commercially, scientifically, technologically, culturally, agriculturally, and industrially. This is why this trip was worthwhile. In Vietnam, we had meetings with the President of Vietnam, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, the highest authority, the President of the National Assembly, and the Minister of Economy. In all meetings, I was satisfied because never before in Brazilian history have we had such productive meetings as these. We also visited Vietnam's military museum, something I recommend Brazilian journalists visit if they can, because this country exemplifies resilience. Vietnam has faced major powers like England, China, France, Russia, and the United States, and emerged victorious each time due to its people's bravery. When people fight for their space and cause, it is not weaponry but love and courage that win wars. This is the country we came to show Vietnam, and I am satisfied because we had meetings with the President of Vietnam, with the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, the highest authority in Vietnam, and with the President of the National Assembly. We also had a meeting with Minister Tim, who handles economic matters. In all these meetings, I was satisfied to be able to say to Brazil that never before in Brazilian history have we had such productive meetings as these. Additionally, we visited Vietnam's military museum. I don't know if there are many Brazilian journalists here or when you will leave, but if you can, pay it a visit. The people here gave me a balm to improve my throat, but it seems to have worsened it. This country is an extraordinary example. This country, except for Russia, has faced all the nations that are part of the UN Security Council. This country has already confronted England, China, France, and the United States, and it won against all of them. This demonstrates that when people fight to defend their space and their cause, it is not weaponry that wins wars, it is love and bravery. Therefore, comrades, I am available for any questions you want to ask. I always say there are no forbidden or difficult questions. If you ask something I don't know how to answer, I will ask the experts here to help me respond. Look, I was in Vietnam in 2008 as the President of Brazil, and this visit now, 17 years later, demonstrates the strength of the Vietnamese people. The growth of this country is remarkable. The progress in infrastructure, economic growth, and improvement in the quality of life for the people of Vietnam is evident. This country has grown at nearly 8 to 8.8%, and very few countries in the world, except for China, have managed to grow so consistently over such a long period, like Vietnam. What is important for us Brazilians is to understand that we can be a gateway for Vietnam into Latin America and South America. For us, it is important to try to bring Vietnam into an agreement with Mercosur. And for us, it is also important that Vietnam serves as a gateway for Brazil into Asia. This alone would have made the visit worthwhile. Additionally, we share common ground with Vietnam on multilateralism and on the need to improve United Nations governance. We agree that the United Nations today no longer represents what it did in 1945 after World War II. The world has changed, global geography has shifted, the importance of countries has evolved. We cannot continue with just the same 5 countries leading the UN since 1945, and still with veto power. If we look at the African continent, there are several countries with more than 100 million inhabitants that should participate. For example, in Africa alone, besides South Africa, which is an economically important country, you have Ethiopia with 116 million inhabitants, Nigeria with 226 million inhabitants, and Egypt with 106 million inhabitants. These are countries that could very well be part of the UN Security Council. You also have Brazil with 200 million inhabitants, Japan with 130 million inhabitants, Germany, a significant country, and India, which has 1.4 billion inhabitants. Yet none of us are part of the UN Security Council. That's why when the UN was created, it had the courage in 1948 to establish the State of Israel, but lacks the capacity today to create a Palestinian state. We know that politics must change. The world has changed. It is unacceptable that today members of the UN Security Council make unilateral decisions without consulting anyone. The United States is a member of the Security Council, but did not consult anyone before invading Iraq. Russia did not consult anyone before invading Ukraine. France and England did not consult anyone before invading Libya. So if the Security Council and its permanent members do not consult anyone and make unilateral decisions, it means that changes are needed at the UN. I know it's difficult because it's an exclusive club of very selective members, but Brazil will not shy away from continuing to fight so that we can reform structures created in the 20th century during this 21st century. We also want changes in financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank. This is an ongoing fight for Brazil. As long as I am president, we will fight for this. We will give speeches and engage in dialogue with others. All these points align with Vietnam's views, which is why I believe this trip was very productive, both in Japan and Vietnam. I hope that when our ministers and technical teams return to Brazil, they do not forget everything that was discussed or agreed upon. Do not leave it sitting in a drawer. It is essential to transform these political and economic discussions into concrete actions. Yesterday was no exception. We arrived late but held meetings on the same day with the President of Vietnam, the President of the National Assembly, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, and even had dinner while enjoying a beautiful performance. These 12 hours of uninterrupted work must have been worth it. Do not forget everything that was discussed. Do not forget everything that was agreed upon. Do not leave it in a drawer. It is necessary to transform the political and economic discussions we had yesterday into concrete actions. It was no coincidence that I held meetings. We arrived late, went to sleep, and held meetings on the same day with the President of the Republic, the President of the Assembly, the General Secretary, and the Prime Minister. We even had dinner and attended a very beautiful show. In other words, these 12 hours of uninterrupted work must have been worth it for us to have come to Vietnam. Now I will pass the floor to Americo Martins from CNN Brazil. Good afternoon, President. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity. President, during this trip, your defense of multilateralism and free trade became even clearer. You spoke about this here and in Japan, leaving Brazil's position very clear. This comes just before a very important moment, the announcement of significant tariffs expected next week by the United States. Sorry, would you like me to repeat? Very well, I will start again. This trip was marked by your strong defense of free trade and multilateralism. You were very emphatic in defending these 2 points, especially free trade. This comes just before an announcement by the American government regarding significant tariffs, initiated by President Donald Trump, that will impose tariffs on products from many countries, most likely including Brazil. You mentioned that Brazil will react, for example, by filing complaints with the WTO or imposing reciprocal tariffs on American products. But would there be another path, such as negotiating directly with the United States? Vietnam, for instance, is doing exactly that. Why don't you call President Donald Trump to try to open negotiations between Brazil and the United States? Thank you very much. First of all, Brazil is doing exactly what needs to be done. Both my Minister Mauro Vieira and my Minister Geraldo Alckmin have already held 2 meetings with U.S. trade representatives to discuss these issues before escalating into disputes over reciprocity or filing complaints with the WTO. We want to exhaust every word in our dictionary to establish free trade with the United States. Historically, the United States has always been an important country for Brazil. We have a trade flow of $87 billion. They have a surplus of $7 billion. So they also need to consider their responsibilities. Honestly, I don't know what will happen with the American economy or what impact this might have, whether it will affect inflation in the U.S., increase interest rates, or something else. What is important is that we recognize that President Trump has every right to do whatever he wants within American politics, and we have every right to do what we want within Brazilian politics, always keeping in mind that we are defenders of free trade. It's worth remembering that the discourse being presented now in the United States is entirely contradictory to what they preached from 1980 to 2022. For nearly 40 years, they advocated free trade and globalization, and suddenly there's a president who wins an election saying, "America for Americans." That's his right, just as I defend Brazil for Brazilians. But since Brazil is not isolated on planet Earth, we are connected by land, sea, and air. We believe that good partnerships between countries are very important. It saddens me greatly to see the United States positioning Trump as if he were the sheriff of the world. He was not elected for that. He was elected to govern the United States. I believe all countries will respond in ways that best suit their needs. So I'll tell you this, Brazil will try to negotiate as much as possible. We will use every word available in our negotiation dictionary, but we will also defend our interests. We will have no hesitation in taking the matter to the WTO, which is the place where all trade disputes should be resolved. If it is not resolved there, we have the right to impose reciprocity on the United States. It's as simple as that. There's no difficulty. The United States just needs to understand that they are not alone on planet Earth. Just look at the world map, and you'll see that the United States is connected to many other countries. If they take unilateral actions, I believe that might not be so good for the United States. Let's see what happens. Since I plan to live 120 years, I have plenty of time to wait and see how President Trump's actions unfold. Now I pass the floor to Francesco Guscio from Reuters. Francesco from Reuters. One of the achievements of this trip has been the agreement with Vietnam for the liberalization of Brazilian beef exports to Vietnam. My question is about. I can say this, JBS and the Vietnamese government signed an agreement, but we didn't come here just to sell beef. If it were only about beef, I would have sent just a minister here. I wouldn't need to be here myself. I came to sell other things, to showcase what Brazil produces for Vietnam and to try to buy what Vietnam produces. This is good trade policy. It's a two-way street. We buy, we sell, with the goal of achieving a balanced trade relationship. Of course, I also came here to promote our COP30 in November and the BRICS meeting, inviting Vietnam to participate. But beyond beef, we discussed other topics because we are negotiating with them about Embraer selling some planes here. Not just a few planes but potentially 50 aircraft. And exploring ways for Vietnam to participate in assembling these Embraer planes locally. Vietnam could serve as a starting point for Embraer's 150 passenger planes to access the Asian market, which is extremely important both politically and economically. We also discussed football. For example, a Brazilian player who is now naturalized scored 2 goals that helped Vietnam qualify for a tournament, a sign that things are moving forward. I suggested that it would be a good idea for them to send some young players to train in Brazil. Who knows? We could discuss this with CBF, Brazilian Football Confederation, or our Ministry of Sports and explore cultural integration between Brazil and Vietnam. Vietnam has a strong culture, and so does Brazil. It's very important for us to establish a cultural connection between our countries. We also discussed partnerships in science and technology between our universities, an extremely important topic, including artificial intelligence and integrating internet access into all public schools in both countries. Finally, we talked about Brazil's new industrial sector. After decades of decline in Brazilian industry, we created a new industrial policy under Alckmin's coordination, which has already resulted in 3.4% growth in our industry after a long period of stagnation. So we came here not only to sell these ideas and perspectives, but also to invite Vietnam to visit Brazil, invest in Brazil, and encourage Brazilian businesses to invest here in Vietnam. They have many things they can buy from us, and surely they have many things they can sell to us as well. The groundwork for business has already been laid. They have already requested what they needed to request, and we have already offered what we needed to offer. Now it is time to turn these intentions into real business deals between Brazil and Vietnam. Let me answer your question. Look, if I feel the need to speak with President Trump, I would have no problem calling him, none at all. Similarly, if he feels the need to talk to me, I hope he wouldn't have any problem calling me either. Just because we have ideological differences doesn't mean that two presidents cannot communicate. After all, in the exercise of the presidency, as heads of state, we don't put our ideological issues on the table, we put the interests of the state. The interests of the Brazilian state and the American state. That's how I view politics, that's how I see our international relations, and that's how I hope the United States understands politics as well. President, good afternoon. Please bring the microphone closer to your mouth, my friend. President, we were granted 3 questions, but there are 5 of us from the press accompanying you on this trip. They only allowed 3 questions for us, which is very tough. In the name of my colleagues, I appeal to you, if you could answer all their questions. My question is this. As you mentioned earlier, it has been a long trip alongside the presidents of the Chamber and Senate. I would like to know if you had the opportunity to discuss the amnesty project with the president of the Chamber, and if you managed to secure any commitment from him not to bring this project forward upon returning to Brazil. Thank you. Let me tell you something. Do you think I would invite the president of the Chamber and the president of the Senate to discuss issues 11,000 meters above sea level that I could discuss on land at my house or their house, in the Senate or in the presidential palace? No. I made a point not to discuss any domestic issues with them during this trip. We will return today. We will arrive home on Sunday. Then starting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we will sit down and address all discussions that need to be held. And I am certain that amnesty is not a primary topic for anyone except those who are feeling guilty about it. It's impressive. I don't understand why lawyers for those seeking amnesty don't tell them that first they need to be acquitted. If they are acquitted, there's no need for amnesty. But they are already treating themselves as if they were guilty. They aren't even trying to defend themselves because deep down they know they committed all the mistakes they are being accused of. They should be defending themselves, fighting back, claiming innocence and providing evidence for their innocence. So far, they haven't done anything except victimizing themselves, as is their habit, insulting others, crying, blaming others for their problems. Only they know what they did, only they know. They should reflect deeply about what happened. Honestly, I haven't spoken with Hugo or Colum about this matter yet because I don't think amnesty is a priority right now. At this moment, there are far more important topics in Congress, issues that matter to Brazilian citizens and aim to improve their lives. That's what we need to discuss when I return to Brazil. That's what I intend to talk about with Colum and Hugo Mota. Since the beginning of this war, we have strongly criticized Russia's territorial occupation of Ukraine. We have been very firm in our stance, and at the same time, we have offered to help find a path to peace between Russia and Ukraine. We even prepared a document with China, presenting ourselves as available to mediate negotiations to achieve peace. At that time, we said it was not possible to negotiate solely with Zelensky. It was necessary to bring both Putin and Zelensky to the table because in a conflict, you cannot talk to just one side, you must talk to both. As someone with good judgment, I could be radical against Trump. However, when Trump makes the decision to discuss peace between Russia and Ukraine, a decision Biden should have made, I am compelled to say that, in this regard, Trump is on the right track. What is Europe's problem? For nearly 3 years, when we said it was necessary to bring Putin and Zelensky together for negotiations, Europe insisted that only Zelensky should be negotiated with. Now that Trump has started talking with Putin, Europe doesn't want to be left out and wants Zelensky included, and I think he should be included. To achieve peace, both Putin and Zelensky must sit at the negotiating table with whoever they invite to participate. They need to stop shooting, start planting food, and discuss peace. That is our hope. Brazil has already signed a document with China expressing this desire. I have personally had the opportunity to call Putin and tell him that it is important to return to diplomacy and find a solution. I plan to visit Russia on May 9th for the commemoration of 80 years since the victory in World War II. Afterward, I will go to China for a meeting with CELAC, Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. In all these forums, I will try to address the issue of peace because Brazil is an example in the world of a country without conflicts. The last conflict we had was during the Paraguayan War, and Brazil did not start it. Brazil was invaded from Corumbá at that time. Paraguay invaded Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay simultaneously. That was Brazil's last conflict. Since then, our motto has been peace and love. Our motto is development, economic growth, and striving for global understanding that war only destroys while peace builds. That's what we aim to do. I intend to discuss this again with Putin soon. This week, I have a call scheduled with Zelensky. I will speak with him as well. I hope he is now focused on peace because until now he wasn't. He believed Putin had to accept his terms as he wanted them, and it doesn't work like that. Nobody has absolute authority or can impose their will on others in a conflict like this. If both sides are willing to negotiate, it will be much better for Ukraine, much better for Russia, much better for Europe, and much better for the world. Europe faces several risks. First, returning to investing in weapons for militarization. Second, having to bear NATO's maintenance costs. Third, financing Ukraine's war efforts. And fourth, rebuilding after the devastation caused by war. This is an enormous responsibility for the European Union, an entity that once symbolized peace, democracy, and harmony. I have always said that building the European Union was a monument to democracy. Unfortunately, they are throwing this away, prematurely in my opinion. Returning to dialogue is all I want. It's all I want. I began my political career by negotiating agreements. When I stood at factory gates protesting against employers or security personnel at factories, I would call the employer afterward, let's negotiate. And we would negotiate. That's my life philosophy. This is how I approach politics as well. Therefore, Brazil is available for as many favorable negotiations as possible for humanity, including negotiations related to Gaza or other global issues. And after that, Luiz from CNN Brazil. I would ask that we combine both questions so the president can respond to them together, and then we'll wrap up. Silvia, please, from Record TV. Thank you very much. Thanks to Murilo, our colleague, for allowing us to ask a question on behalf of the reporters who weren't part of the draw. President, you were in Japan before coming to Vietnam. And these were two countries that yielded significant results for Brazil. Japan, unfortunately, has been negotiating the process of opening its market to Brazilian beef for decades. Meanwhile, Vietnam has moved ahead and opened its market more significantly. Is there a chance that Vietnam could surpass Japan in terms of trade? And what is the potential of ASEAN as a springboard for Brazil to further explore this region in the future? Could this lead to a shift in focus for Brazil's trade and political relations? Look, I've been invited to participate in the ASEAN meeting in the middle of the year, and I'm very eager to attend. I still want to visit Malaysia, which invited me to this ASEAN meeting. I also want to visit Indonesia because it's a very important country. It has forests. And after that, I want to dedicate myself to making some visits to African countries and consolidating the relationships Brazil has built. You see, we don't need to rush. What we need to understand is this: we must offer our products to Japan. Japan, Vietnam, and South Korea are three important markets for Brazilian beef. Brazilian beef has improved both in quantity and quality. Today, it rivals any other country in quality. We just want to compete. But it's not just about beef. We also want to sell airplanes and everything else that involves Brazilian intelligence and innovation that we can offer the world. We want to sell products from the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, and the Ministry of Transportation. We want Brazilian companies to return to building infrastructure worldwide. Brazilian companies used to be present throughout Latin America. They were active all over the world, in the Middle East and across almost every African country. But this was destroyed when Operation Car Wash began. At one point, Brazilian companies had nearly 5,000 workers employed in Arab countries, but all of that ended. Why? Because the United States wants to build? Because Europe wants to build? No, Brazil must compete. If it depends on me, Brazilian companies will return to building bridges, highways, railways, hydroelectric plants, worldwide. That's the role of a country with engineering capabilities that are competitive anywhere in the world. I don't know what the intention was behind destroying this capacity, but they destroyed it. And we want to rebuild it. We will do this with every country. Look at why Brazil's relationship with Japan is so limited now. It used to be much stronger. Brazil has had ties with Japan since 1908. That's 130 years of diplomatic relations. At one point, our trade flow reached $17 billion. Why did it fall? We need to find out why. Minister Favaro needs to investigate this. My Minister of Industry and Commerce needs to investigate this. My Minister of Foreign Relations needs to investigate this. Why should we remain stagnant when we've already achieved $17 billion in trade before? We can return to those levels. This is part of my role as President of the Republic. Beyond taking care of Brazil's domestic interests, I must also take care of its external interests because external interests can facilitate bringing dollars into Brazil and boosting production in our industries, agriculture sector, textile sector. That's what a president must do. Why do I bring business people with me? Because while I can open doors as President of the Republic, it's business people who actually close deals, not me. So rest assured, as someone young like you, you'll see me traveling a lot more and trying to sell all kinds of Brazilian products. From football players to volleyball players or basketball players, from artificial intelligence solutions to partnerships, and all kinds of products that our workers know how to produce. We have so much potential. Let me tell you a story you might not know. In 2010, when I left the presidency of Brazil, the country was registering almost 3.6 million cars. Let me repeat, in 2010, we were registering 3.6 million vehicles. The automotive industry had forecasted that by 2015, we would be producing 6 million cars. But do you know what happened? When I returned in 2023, Brazil was producing only 1.6 million vehicles. Not only did production not grow, but it lost half of what it used to produce. Now we are recovering. We are already at 2.6 million vehicles and will reach 3.6 million again before I leave office. To produce cars, there must be a market, and for there to be a market, people must have the purchasing power to buy them. If there's no market and no buyers, how can production happen? That's my role. Additionally, Brazilian industry needs to be more aggressive. It makes no sense for American cars to dominate Latin America, in Uruguay, Venezuela, and Bolivia, when there should be cars produced in Brazil. We need to be the ones selling and making deals because international trade is a continuous cycle of production and competition. No one gives anyone a break. No one offers favors. What we need is to step out of our comfort zone and sell what we produce, sell the quality of our products. Who else has the capability to compete in hybrid car production like Brazil? Cars that can run on electricity, ethanol, gasoline, or hydrogen. By 2030, we'll even be producing flying cars. Who can compete with Brazil? So it's up to us to promote ourselves. Who can compete with Brazil in energy transition? No one. That's why I travel, to tell people that Brazil is extraordinary at what it does. And I am proud of that. That's why I say Brazilians never give up, and I won't give up either because I believe it is our duty to transform Brazil into an economic powerhouse. My dream is for Brazil to become a middle-class country. Wherever she wants to go, she will go. Whatever she wants to say, she will say. And wherever she wants to walk, she will walk. That's how I see the role of a woman. Well, everyone, I want to thank you. Let's go. I'll tell you something with all the care I have. I think every Brazilian is capable of comparing this team with the other teams we've had in the past. I think we have a problem. We no longer have the same abundance and brilliance of star players that we once had. When you think about the time when we had players like Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Kaká, Rivaldo, and Adriano, and compare it to what we have today, the difference is enormous. I don't think the issue is changing the coach. If I were the coach of the national team, after the Brazilian championship ended, I would call up the 22 best players who participated in the championship, players who are here in Brazil, eating from this country and experiencing its reality, and put them on the national team to see what would happen. Because we need to consider why a second-tier team in England is more prominent than a first-tier team here in Brazil. How many players from Botafogo, Flamengo, Corinthians, or Sao Paulo could be on the national team? How many? I think it's a matter of choice. This business of constantly changing coaches won't work. Coaches don't perform miracles. For example, look at what Felipe Luiz is doing at Flamengo. It's important to remember that even Guardiola, who is considered one of the best coaches, isn't always winning at Manchester City. When you change players, things can start to fall apart a bit. So what I think is that we need to be aware of this. We are in an era where our pool of players is not as strong as it used to be for a country that has had such incredible talent. What we need is patience, not provocation. Provoking Argentina on their home turf shows a lack of political awareness because Argentina deserves respect. It's important to remember that Argentina has won more Libertadores titles than Brazil and more Copa America titles than Brazil. In several direct confrontations, Argentina and Uruguay compete closely with Brazil. Respect is something valuable. We want to receive it, and we must give it as well. When Brazil didn't show respect and went there to Argentina, they suffered a heavy defeat. I was afraid it might almost reach 7-1 like against Germany. Thankfully, it didn't. We got out alive because we only lost 4-1. I sincerely admire coaches like Ancelotti and Guardiola. I like many coaches, but in Brazil, we also have great coaches. The problem, my dear friend, is that when you don't have the right pieces, players, things don't work out. Just look at where Argentina's goals against Brazil came from. You'll see which players were involved and whose mistakes led to those goals. What I admire about Europe is that when a striker loses possession of the ball, he runs back to recover it. Here in Brazil, many times players put their hands on their hips and expect someone else to recover the ball for them. We need more physical effort and collective effort. If we do that, even I could be the coach of the national team. Take care. Thank you all for being here. Until next time.
Se a gente fizer isso, até eu posso ser técnico da seleção. Um abraço.